Okay, can you? Okay. Good evening, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all, both in presence and online. On behalf of the Advocacy Hub, I'm Andrea, and here we have Alessandra and Sabaeta, and online we have Giulia and Joanna. We are honored to host this event, and we're glad you're here with us today. The seminar that is called Resistance and Revolution, Human Rights Activism in the MENA Region. And it is a privilege to see actually so many engaged individuals in this room. Today's event is an opportunity for us to engage in open dialogue, learn from experiences of our guest speakers, and reflect on the ongoing struggle for freedom and rights in the MENA region. We are especially excited to hear from our guests, Patrick Zaki and Dr. Francesco Saverio Leopardi, who will offer some insight, perspective, and point of view on the challenges and hopes of the human rights activism. I would also like to extend a warm thank you to the Human Rights Center, not only for hosting this event in this beautiful venue, but also for always engaging in human rights advocacy and for its commitment to dialogue and raising awareness on human rights issues. Last but not least, I would also like to thank Professor De Perini for his commitment and for his guidance during all this journey. And his contribution has been so valuable and instrumental in shaping this project. And before we begin, I would just like to add something. We would like that this space is going to be a meaningful platform for exchange, reflection, and eventually also collective action. So I'm done, but before I'm done for real, I would like to invite Professor De Perini on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Good evening to everyone here and in presence. Also on behalf of Professor Marco Mascio, who is the president of the Human Rights Center, let me extend my welcome to the Human Rights Center, especially to our students. And I see some faces from the first year of the master degree, so welcome twice. I'm not here to say anything significant, just to give the floor to our guest who has the most important thing to say. Just let me stress that the Advocacy Hub is a student initiative that organizes seminars and activities for students. So by students, for students, and we are very glad and to some extent proud of the work they are doing or what they have been organizing. We had two important seminars in the past with very nice participation by students. Now we have this very interesting and central issue with our guests, Patrick and Saverio, and many others are in the pipeline, if I'm not wrong. So without further ado, I give you the floor for this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor De Perini. Good evening, everyone. I am Sabaeta Zenelli, a second-year student in human rights and multi-level governance. Thank you for joining us today and for the interest that you've shown in this event. Before we give the floor to our distinguished guests, I would like to offer a brief disclaimer. While today's topic refers to the MENA region as a whole, meaning the Middle East and North Africa, it's important to recognize the diversity of countries and contexts within this region. Given the limited time available today, it's impossible to cover the human rights activism and its situation in every country in the region. Therefore, to avoid generalizations, we will focus primarily on Egypt due to its relevance to our discussion and the expertise of one of our speakers. When we talk about resistance and revolution in this region, the so-called Arab Spring or Arab uprisings of 2011 stand as a pivotal moment. However, the outcomes varied significantly across countries. And today we will briefly touch upon the historical context of the Arab uprisings of 2011, with a particular focus on the Egyptian cause, as mentioned. With that in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Francesco Saverio Leopardi, a research fellow at the Department of Political Sciences, Law and International Studies at the University of Padova. Some of us had the opportunity to attend his course on international history of the Middle East last year, and many of you will have this chance to do so this year. Dr. Leopardi's work focuses on the contemporary history of the Middle East, making him the ideal guide to help us navigate the complex outcomes of revolutionary movements in the region. And with that, I'm honored to leave the floor to Dr. Leopardi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to see such a wide turnout and also very young turnout, which is not always the case in occasion like this. So it's particularly appreciated. So I have the task to introduce somewhat the historical and political context of the so-called Arab uprisings, which are often referred as Arab Springs, which is a term that I not particularly like because it's some more pertaining to journalism, and also because it gives away the idea that after the spring comes the winter, which leaves no hope for future development and do not help historical comprehension of the events. So Egypt is a very good case to look at what happened throughout the region. Of course, as it was correctly reminded, each country has its own specificities, but Egypt has always been somewhat a standard or a point of comparison and of emulation for other, particularly Arab countries in the region. So what happened in 2011 caught many observers by surprise. The idea that after more than 30 years, President Mubarak could be overthrown seemed absolutely impossible on the eve of the uprisings, yet the roots of this event were long in the making, of course. Some historians, particularly French-Lebanese historian Gilbert Achcar, when looking at the Arab uprising, described the premises that allowed this wave of uprisings to break out as a consequence of what he defined blocked development. Meaning that if we emphasize the socioeconomic situation in the region, many of those countries, particularly Egypt, were blocked in their human, industrial, economic development. The premises upon which these states were founded after independence, the idea that now that these countries had achieved political independence, had to achieve economic independence by industrializing quickly, by providing improving living condition to its population, was a goal that was somewhat missed, right? The social pact upon which this society stood was the idea that although these countries were ruled by authoritarian governments, and in Egypt this was the case since the very beginning of the Egyptian Republic after the coup d'etat in 1952. Nonetheless, these authoritarian governments could provide its population with access to improving living conditions, and education, and job opportunities, which is something that happened throughout the 50s and the 60s. But the inability of the Egyptian economy in this case to become internationally competitive, to industrialize at the same level of the European countries, and the reasons for these are many. Maybe we don't have the time to go very much in depth. Produced a result where the improved living condition led to a demographic boom already by the 60s, the 70s, even more so in the 80s and the 90s. But the job opportunities, the economy was not as developed enough to absorb this new wave of new population. Just remember that today Egypt has more than 100 million inhabitants, making it one of the most populous Arab country, and one of the most important and big country in Africa as well, and the Middle East and North Africa, of course. So the socioeconomic situation was a factor, right? Young people, no access to job. So one part of the social pact is broken because the state grew increasingly authoritarian, but is not providing for its population. At the same time, by the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, the state, which used to be the main actor in the economy, starts to withdraw. You know, the 70s is the age of the neoliberal globalization, the idea that the state is no longer the main engine of economic development, but the market, the private actors are. So these led also in countries such as Egypt, the state to withdraw from its duties as a provider of social services. Problem was that nobody took its place. The state remained important. State actors, public enterprises remain important in the economy, maintain a control over the economy. In Egypt, particularly the army, which represents a real state in the state. We have a whole set of industries that are entirely run by the army, which take advantage of the very cheap labor, which are conscripts. So in this context, the state, the army in Egypt remains important, but the state fades to play its role of social developer, if we can say so. Liberalization, economic liberalization in Egypt and in the rest of the Middle East does not really mean a turn to the market or the emergence of real independent private actor. In many cases, it means what has been defined following the example of what happened in the former Soviet Union after the downfall of socialism in nomenclatura privatization, namely those close to power, those close to the circle of power, take advantage of the new laws that allows for privatization, and so take over large chunks of the market. So the association between private initiative and state power remains very, very close, right? And this was best represented by in Egypt by the Mubarak family itself, and by the particularly a figure which was the son of Hosni Mubarak, Gamal Mubarak, which would also spark the popular uproar, because in Egypt, one of the key ideas that was refused was the idea that after Hosni Mubarak, we would enter into a sort of hereditary republic where Gamal, thanks to his own position, his own being part of the Mubarak family, would be the next in line after Hosni Mubarak's death. And this was something that was rejected by most of the population. In the meanwhile, in the 90s and the early 2000s, political mobilization, which suffered in the 80s, entered a new phase. We see a new activism when it comes to independent trade unions, that start to organize and mobilize in the major industrial hubs in Egypt. We also see new civil society organizations that have a chance to develop in the context of regional events. Movement that will play a key role in the 2011 uprising, such as the Kifaya movement, emerged during Egyptian protest in solidarity with either the Second Palestinian Intifada in 2000 or again in protest against the US invasion of Iraq. So here's why we have always to remind how meaningful events in different areas of the region are for single countries, because there is, of course, a connection when it comes to political identity, cultural identity, linguistic identity, of course. So this movement created the premises for a large mobilization. And when in January 2011, on the day of that was supposed to celebrate the holiday, the police day in Egypt, many took to the streets, we could observe that there was a key difference from past mobilization. These mobilizations were identitarian, let's say. We had people who had a secular background, people with an Islamist background, transgenerational, so different generation of political activists, which merged together in the idea that enough was enough, as the name of the organization Kifaya actually means. It's meant enough with corruption, enough with clientelism. The idea was to bring about a sort of liberal democracy at least at the beginning, in Egypt. Then, when the first main goal was achieved, namely the downfall of Hosni Mubarak, the situation became more complicated because, of course, then discussing on what really to do, it's another matter. I think I can stop here. Maybe we can pick up some points later if something was not clear, but I give the floor to the rest.
Thank you very much, Professor Leopardi, for your clear introduction on the topic. And so I thank you also, everybody, for being here today and our guests for taking the time to come here and discuss with us. I am Alessandra, and I'm a second-year student of the Master Program Human Rights and Multi-Level Governance. I am delighted to introduce to you Patrick Zaki. He is now a PhD student in human rights of the Scuola Normale di Pisa. He's a human rights defender, human rights activist. And maybe some of you know he's quite known in Italy because he entered the media in 2020 after the beginning of the campaign in favor of his release conducted by Amnesty International, the Italian civil society, and other organizations. Because actually Patrick on February the 8th, 2020 was arrested. He was actually victim of enforced disappearance and torture because he was stopped at the airport in Cairo by the agents of the National Security Agency and detained for 22 months. 22 months characterized by what we could call a judicial persecution because the accusation were of spreading fake news and inciting terrorism. And the practice of delaying the length of his detention was one of the main characteristics, main features of his detention. After 22 months of resistance and campaigning, it was finally released by means of presidential pardon on July the 19th, 2023. And now we are pleased to give the floor to Patrick, and my questions to you are actually shifting back to the period Professor Leopardi was explaining us about your standpoint as an active citizen, as a political activist and human rights activist back in Tahrir Square on January the 25th, 2011. What were the claims of the youth and of the Egyptian civil society back there that day? Thank you.
I'm really pleased to be here today. Thanks for the Department of Human Rights. Thanks for the University of Padova to have me here today. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with a lot of students who are really into human rights like me, because it's not usually happening to have all those people who are really interested in human rights in the same room. So it's a great feeling to feel that we are intersecting even before talking about what's happening considering human rights. I want to add something only about what Alessandra, my friend and my colleague said, that not only Amnesty and like the Italian society, but also the Bologna University played an important role in my campaign, and they play an important role in my freedom. So I can't miss talking about the University of Bologna, the city of Bologna, all the cities of Italy, but also important to mention the role of the university in campaigning, because a lot of prisoners of consciousness is there, not only in Egypt, but all over the world, and they didn't have the same privilege of mind that their universities are talking out loud and making as much as they can to release them. So it's a reminder that the university have an important role toward their students, and they have an important role to defend the right of their students to express themselves openly and to apply what they are studying in the universities from spaces of human rights and right to express themselves openly. It's a reminder. I think like talking about 2011, like I didn't know that the professor will say all this historical background. I was preparing something a little like that related to what's going on, but for sure I will talk from a personal experience because I was there at this time. The professor mentioned some important points that I want you to focus on if you are really interested in Egypt, that there were some stages that really built the revolution in 2011 that we should be really aware of. The economical problem in 2008 was one of the main things that start the aggression or the the madness over the regime of Mubarak, because the economical situation at this point was really hard for most of the people, because as you know, in Egypt, the economical situation was in a very dark place at this moment, as that 75% of the population are under the line of the minimal wage, and it was really hard situation for them. If we are talking about what happened in 2011, we should be really aware of what led the 2011. It's the 30 years of the authoritarian regime of Hosni Mubarak, who was using violence, censorship, prohibition, economical situation, the education situation, the health situation, all this connected and lead to the 2011 revolution. For me, I will mention the name of Kifaya. The professor mentioned this because that was the first spark or the first movement who start on societal level, population level, to ask Mubarak to leave. And kifaya in Arabic means basta, like enough, like it's over. And it was a sign that we don't want you anymore in Egypt. I remember that my first interference was with human rights or with this field was because I grew up in a minority, Coptic minority, Christian minority in Egypt, in a small city far from Cairo, North Cairo. It's called Mansoura. And I was growing up in a community who's a little bit having some aggression or some racism toward the Coptic minority, and that made me, when I was really young, wondering why this is happening. What's the reason behind that? Why these people are dealing with me like that? Why my colleagues in the school are really not welcoming, communicating with me? What's the barrier? And that made me start thinking. For sure, I wasn't a human rights researcher in the school, but I was searching what's that, and that was maybe the key for me to really be interested in human rights, and specifically my proficiency was about minorities. Going through that, I think he also, like the professor mentioned, very two important moments in my life. I think Intifada, the Palestinian Intifada, was the first time that I participated in any political thing or anything related to human rights. I think it was my first time to know that there is something called the conflict, there's something called like occupation, arms, and this stuff. And it was my first time to participate in something related to politics in the school. That was the first one. The another one was the war over Iraq, when USA invaded Iraq. I remember really well that I was really terrified at this moment when I saw all of this happening, and my father explaining to me what's going on right now, and that's a kind of invasion. Going forward, because of the time, I will talk about the revolution. Very important events took place that make the people really anger before the revolution. I remember two very important events. The first one was a video that was leaked from one of the police officers for using aggression and violence and making fun of prisoner who have been subjected to anal in course with a hard thing, and that was filmed and published all over Egypt about the aggression of the police toward the population. And that was one of the main things that make the people really mad. Not only that, but there were a very important incident on the New Year 2010 by bombing a church in Alexandria, and a lot of researchers, a lot of activists really thought that at this moment, this bombing was done by the Egyptian regime or the intelligences of Egypt, because they want to cover the anger of the street, the anger of the society. For sure, I don't have confirmation about that, but that's what they said at this moment, or what they claim. But it was really effective in the wrong way, because the people got more mad. And even always in Egypt, the Christians are not part of the political scene. The regime in Egypt always like to make the minorities in ghettos, like everyone have his own ghetto. He's living in this ghetto and he don't interfere with the other. Even you can find in this age political like figures who are Christians. They are trying always to make everyone away from the other. And to make this differentiation in the society, because that make them always winning, because everyone in the society need to be close to them to have part of the economical privileges. I think those very two important events before the revolution was very effective. during the revolution. I remember that 25 January 2011, I was in Cairo. We were about 20,000 in the all over Cairo, close to Tahrir Square, trying to enter Tahrir Square. And the humiliation started from prohibiting people from entering Tahrir Square and using violence from the police toward the protester. At this moment, I was volunteering for one of the human rights organization, and we're documenting what's going toward everyone, because at this moment in 25 Jan, the Egyptian regime arrested thousands of protesters and human rights activists and politicians because they don't want the revolution to happen. But at this moment, like, it was over. Like, the population really don't accept to stay silent and will not accept the remain of the regime. Very important name that you should search about is Wa'il Ghunaim. Wa'il Ghunaim is the one who make the first group over Facebook. And by the way, the Egyptian revolution is a little bit unique about it was the first important example about using social media to ask the people to demonstrate and to appear and to revolute in the squares. For sure, Tunisia also, but also Egypt was really into social media because a group on Facebook started everything, considering the places of like demonstrating, the places of the protests, what's happening there. And even the social media have been used as a weapon from the human rights defender, human rights institutions, journalists, also advocates, while the revolution taking place to tell the people where to go, where not to go, what's happening in the street, how to avoid the oppression, a lot of stuff. For me, 28 of Jan, we started to occupy Tahrir Square. We stayed there for a long time till the end of the regime of Hosni Mubarak. It wasn't easy because honestly, on a personal level, I faced at those like 10 days the numerous kinds of oppression in front of me. People have been sniped. And I remember this thing like it happens right now. Every time I remember this, like it's really hard, a trauma to see one who was like really next to you that he did by a sniper because he's asking for freedom, he is asking for democracy, for all this stuff. So talking about humiliations that taking place during the revolution, for sure, the regime, the Egyptian regime and the Egyptian police play an important role. And if you want to take a case study about the revolution to check, there is two important events in the revolution in Egypt. One is called the Camels incident, when the Egyptian regime bring like horses and camels and they make them run over the protesters and they push them toward the Tahrir Square to try to make the people go out, run from Tahrir Square and to leave the square, thinking that will change the situation. That was a very, very important incident. And also the other one, it was a very important thing that the Egyptian regime decided at a specific moment that they will target the protesters in their eyes. They will shoot their eyes exactly and specifically. And that started at the end of the first 10 days before before Hosni Mubarak was leaving the control of Egypt, and it extended to even the phase after the revolution. For me, as a human rights defender, at this moment I was in the university. I was like enrolled, but I was reading a lot. If you want to know more about human rights in Egypt and the institutions of human rights, there is the godfather of human rights in Egypt, and he's called Ahmed Saif al-Islam. He's the first human rights advocate who really start everything, who start the first, one of the first institutions in Egypt. If you are really interested in the history of the human rights in Egypt, you should search about this name. And mentioning his name is really important to talk about something taking place right now that we refer to, that his son is Ala Abdel Fattah. Ala Abdel Fattah is the most well-known human rights defender who are still right now in the prison, and he's in detention even when he finished his like time of detention, which was like 4 years, but he's still there, the Egyptian regime forcing him, and we will talk about this later. Ala Fattah is the son of Ahmed Saif al-Islam, and he's now in the prison. Okay, so it was really important to talk about Ahmed Saif al-Islam, who started this. And also another important name is Hussam Bahgat. He's one of a very important researchers, and he's the head of the Egyptian Initiative of Personal Rights, where I was collaborating for 5 years or 6 years. I will not talk a lot about Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, but honestly, it's the most pioneer and the most important reference for human rights defenders when they are searching about something related to human rights in Egypt. Also, if we are talking about the governmental rule, I want to say that always in Egypt, the human rights institutions have been attacked. A very important case have been made for everyone who having an institution in Egypt after the revolution. They listed about 250 names in one case of spying, getting money, getting funds from European or Western countries to irritate the public opinion, to make a revolution. And those people was on a travel ban and asset freeze for closely 7 years. One of them is the man that I mentioned, Hussam Bahgat, was one of those people, one of the most and very important women rights defenders is Azza Sulaiman. And also she was like on a travel ban like for 7 years, just like 1 or 2 years ago, they removed the travel ban from her and she's traveling. So the Egyptian Society of Human Rights pay back a lot what they did and their role in participating and documenting all the humiliations that took place during the revolution of 2011. For sure, I can talk about everything in short time, but I was trying to give you some important points that you can even search about, that you can, if you are really interested in the situation in Egypt, you can search about it, or could lead you as a keys for knowing much more about the situation of human rights in Egypt during the revolution.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for sharing your personal experience and also these valuable insights. Reflecting a bit on the aftermath of the revolution, I would like to ask Dr. Leopardi, kind of a big question, but why do you believe that the initial hopes and aspirations of the Tahrir Square movement weren't fully realized? In your view, what role did internal and external forces such as the political actors, the military, or the international influence play in this outcome? And maybe what lessons can be learned for future movements?
See, one of the problems of having events organized by students that they do not know the academic etiquette of not asking difficult questions to the speakers. So this is definitely a huge one. Where to begin? So I concluded mentioning that there was in the Tahrir Square movement the common idea of putting an end to the Mubarak regime. The point was that probably, and of course here we are simplifying, of course, right? There was no an equally clear idea of how the regime was constituted, how the regime worked. Many at the time still believed that the army could be seen as a guarantor of the basic values that upon which the Republic of Egypt was founded. So many looked at the army as the only institution that could transition the country towards a new political future. So it was not clear that, of course, Mubarak was, of course, it was the head of the system, but it was not just the whole system, right? Behind it was the expression of a power system in which the army was the backbone. And this was something that was created right after the 1952 coup by the Free Officer movement led by Gamal Abdel Nasser. Actually took over power in Egypt. Because in a country with weak institution that had achieved independence only a few years earlier, of course, the army represented the only institution with enough strength to guide the country towards independence and towards its ambitious goals. So this allowed the army to grow as the most important institution in Egypt. And these allowed the army itself to, as I said before, become a state in the state. So the protests of 2011 weren't able to clearly, of course, offer an alternative to this situation and, of course, to outpower the army. this is probably a very far-fetched goal, given the imbalance of forces in Egyptian society. Moreover, the Egyptian protesters were not so united as they appeared during the A days of the uprisings. There were still splits that, again, we can simplify, the most important of which was among those who supported the most important, what was the most important political organization that had been underground for so long in Egypt, namely the Muslim Brotherhood, and those who were more wary of the role of the Islamists. This is a division that allowed the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, which ruled over the transition in Egypt, to play on this division. And for instance, this was allowed the movement that led to the coup d'etat in 2013 by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to take over, with some popular support, because many looked at President Mohamed Morsi, which was the first democratic elected president in Egypt. They started to look at him with growing suspicions because of this divide, and also because of how the Muslim Brotherhood behaved after he took over. First of all, we must say that the Muslim Brotherhood came to the protests at the second moment, right? It was not there from the very beginning, but it was the best organized organization. So it was able to catch the momentum, right? And express a political elite and a few leaders for the post-revolutionary period. The problem was that the Muslim Brotherhood did not start to think as a governing force. It was still influenced by the long years underground. So the first goal was to protect the organization itself, to take over the reins of power, to change some aspects of the Egyptian Republic in order to shape its own vision for Egypt. And this alienated part of the population and part of those who protest in 2011. And some of them rallied behind the army, because they believed the army was the protector of secular, progressive Egypt, although, of course, this was not the case. It's enough to mention the fact that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was first brought to power by Morsi himself, right? So Sisi represented somewhat the Islamist side of the army. Funny enough, if we look at this more than 10 years after the coup d'etat. So the problem was that there was no, within the protest movement, there was no clear institutionalized political parties. Patrick was mentioning Wael Ghanim as one of the key actors, and his figure is really telling of this problem, because Wael Ghanim did not live in Egypt. He worked at Google, Middle East hub at Google. So how can we say he was not the typical political activist, right? He was not a trade unionist. He was not a cadre in a party. The role of social media was important, but the Egyptian experience demonstrated that social media is a tool that cannot take the place of real mobilization and real connection. And I'm now making a critique of the movement. Of course, it's not easy to mobilize under a dictatorship, under an authoritarian regime. So we have to consider all of one of the reasons why we don't have institutionalized movement in Egypt is also because of the everlasting omnipresence of the infamous mukhabarat, the internal secret services, which plays a similar role in Egypt, in Syria, Algeria, for that matter, and other countries of the region, of course. So the lack of an institutionalized opposition party, which had a clear idea for the future, clear platform, no matter how utopian, right? We did not have any communist party that wanted to create socialism. We did not have any Solidarność that wanted to create a free, liberal democracy in Egypt. And this was a problem, not only in Egypt, but throughout the region, which led the only organization that had this institutional power were the Islamist organization, which had other problems. They could not mobilize the whole of the population, they cannot rally the whole of the population in different Arab countries behind their goal. Then, of course, just to mention the international situation, one of the key problems was that the continued survival of regime like the one of Hosni Mubarak and today of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is also enabled by the constant support that they received from European countries and the United States, and also other actors such as the Chinese Republic or Russia. All of these are, while the Chinese and the Russian have a different approach, they are not interested in what happened within each country. They want just to make business, particularly the Chinese. No, we are here just to make business and have mutually profitable relations. The European Union and the United States started to drop their discourse on the protection of human rights and the promotion of democracy, as their main goal remained achieving security. So, and this is also something that is ingrained in the ignorance of European leaders towards the social and political situation in these countries. The idea that to keep Islamist terrorism at bay, we need to support strong men like Mubarak, like Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, not realizing that the very existence of this regime is one of the factors that fuels also violent resistance. After all, it's no surprise that a country such as Tunisia, that has been so close to Europe for a long time, is the country of origin of the most volunteers who joined the Islamic State in 2014 and 2015, which should tell us something of the policies that Europe had towards those countries. So this is a key problem, that particularly the European Union dropped all of its policies when it comes to supporting the human rights for the sake of prioritizing security. At the end of the, and also, I mean, it's a very controversial point because, you know, more often enough, the idea of supporting human rights has been used to interfere within the internal affairs of those countries. So that is why the issue of human rights, the concept of human rights, is not something where we have a consensus, particularly in the non-European context. Sometimes it's seen as, you know, a European concept, a label that hides very little content behind itself, which is actually why it is important to stress why a right interpretation of human rights is important everywhere at the same, in the same way, not just with different implementation. So I'm not sure I will answer the last question. Do you see any potential for meaningful social political transformation in Egypt? Let me just say one thing. The Sisi regime has somewhat reinstated the same dynamics that we observed during the Mubarak era, but with even less political credibility, even less, to a certain extent, economic possibilities. Today, Egypt is a country in deep economic and financial crisis, is in a very dire relation with the International Monetary Fund, which continues to delay the revision for the program that it extended in support of the Egyptian economy. So Egypt is really, economically speaking, in a very bad situation. And the very roots that led to the Arab uprising of 2011 are still there. The point is that we still do not have a strong movement that is capable of proposing an alternative platform, an alternative view of a new Egypt, different institutions, right? So we are still facing the same problems. But a very key idea that they want to leave you with is that the Arab uprising should not just be considered as a one event. It should be looking upon from an historical point of view. Just think about finding yourself in France in 1789. You look at 20 years later, you see a guy, Napoleon, that is crowning himself emperor, right? And say, what the hell happened with the revolution, right? The long-lasting effect of this revolution were to be appreciated later. Of course, this is a very stretched comparison, so do not really believe me on this, like be critical about what I'm saying. But the point is that the Arab uprising opened a cycle of political transformations that is yet to be defined, yet to be finished, which is going to take decades probably, Other factors will influence this process once and for all. For instance, climate change. And I'm not saying that the outcome will be positive necessarily. The point is that again, the idea of process, we should always keep in mind that this is a process we are looking at. And so in process, in crisis, also lies the possibility of something creative and positive.
Thank you very much again, Professor Leopardi. And speaking with your words about the process, in this process, what is the current situation now? I would like to ask to Patrick, what do actually those people, also new activists, human rights defenders, journalists, and human rights lawyers face with when confronted with the Halab del al-Sisi regime? And you mentioned also Alab del Fattah and cases of political prisoners, prisoners of consciousness. How do they overcome these challenges? How to overcome these challenges? And what could us, as people who advocate for human rights, do in order to contribute to this process of change in order to have a positive outcome?
Okay, that's a very long question. I will try to talk a little bit about, as much as so, but I want to comment over like a couple of stuff that the professor just mentioned. The first thing about that, for sure, the presence of Wael Ghonim was very important, but if we are talking critically about analyzing the movement and how it's formed, social media and Facebook group was a tool. If the people are not willing to do the revolution, if they didn't have the ability to do the revolution, it will not happen for sure. I just want to highlight this because that's very important. If you misunderstand what I was saying, that Wael Ghonim was the main reason, no, for sure Wael Ghonim is nothing considering the revolution. He was only a way of finding innovative ways to overcome the securitization of the Egyptian government by they are tracking all the mobile calls, they are tracking all the telephone lines. So all the politicians can't make a real connection over this because they know all the movements of all those politicians. They know all the deals between them. They know every thing related to the organizing of the movement on the ground. So using the social media was a tool, an innovative tool to try to overcome this way of the embedding of the Egyptian intelligence in every small detail in the society. And I have a very funny story about this, that when we make the revolution, a lot of people enter forcefully the intelligence building, and they find out that a lot of calls have been monitored between people, like random people who are talking about really people who are dating over the phone. Like you can find everything because they are really having file for everyone from the 80 millions at this time in Egypt. So they were really embedded in our life. So Wael Ghonim, with his innovative tool, was a tool that helped us to overcome this securitization. Another 2 points very fast. That's the professor mentioned like Russia and China, why they were not interested. For me, I have a different point of view about that, since like 1973, after October and the war between Egypt and Israel, it was really clear that it was a critical moment that Egypt show closeness more to the American regime, and they are following the American regime, and they changed their bias from being with Russia before that to be a little bit toward the relation with USA at this time, and that affected a lot after that, because at the same moment of the revolution in Egypt, Russia and China was focusing on Syria because they are working on the connection between Iran, Lebanon. For sure, the professor know more than this, more than me about this, but that was the rule of Russia, that they were really focusing on the movement in Syria more than Egypt, because they were really interested more in interfering in Syria and what's happening in Syria and how this will be connected with Iran, with Lebanon. Maybe that what make really USA was a most important player in the revolution in Egypt, and that at one time they decide that they don't want Hosni Mubarak anymore, and that's for sure play an important role, even in like don't have Hosni Mubarak anymore in the power. Another thing, considering Muslim Brotherhood and their rule, I'm really appreciating that he mentioned, the professor mentioned that they weren't a main player. Muslim Brotherhood used the momentum, as he mentioned. And by the way, for me, honestly, a lot of times Muslim Brotherhood was attacking us as human rights defender, as activists in the streets, even when we were criticizing the government sometimes for their violence toward the protesters in front of the parliament, they joined the government in attacking us and using like guns toward us. It was really a mad situation. Here, a very important event is Maspero incident. Maspero incident is the only attack that was subjected in the revolution toward the Christian minority, because the Christian minority at this moment tried to go to ask for their rights to build church, to have equal opportunities, to have equity. And at this moment, the government used the extremist Muslims, even including Muslim Brotherhood at this moment, to push them to attack the Christians who are protesting and demonstrating. And at this moment, one of the most important figures of the revolution passed away, whose name Mina Daniel. He was one of the first people who entered Tahrir Square in the revolution. Muslim Brotherhood was always trying to look for their benefits, how they can make a political benefit of the revolution, jumping on all the ongoing stuff in Egypt and trying to make the most outcome as a party. And for sure, they were the most prepared party for this moment. And to know about this more, we need to read what Gamal Abdel Nasser did for the left movement in the 60s and 70s, and how he imprisoned them and how he worked a lot to decompose them. But the Muslim movement was much stronger than the left movement. I'm sorry that I'm talking a little bit about politics more than human rights in this context, but it's a historical background that's really important to cover. Talking about the current situation in Egypt, I think that the Egyptian regime, after their arrival and after the presence of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, it was the first time that we really know that the revolution in Egypt like lose all the progress and all the privileges. Since the arrival of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, he changed all the laws, he misused all the laws, and he was trying to tackle everyone who's not on the same term with the policies of the Egyptian army, because Egypt now in the period of like a mix between military capitalistic form, like even now the fight in Egypt right now, the fight in Egypt between the military institutions who have the power over all the project, over all the economy, and the businessmen, like that's the real fight right now in Egypt, like between them, who will be in the power more than the other. And the International Bank is asking and arguing Egypt, trying to make the army like withdrawing from some investment to give the space for investment from the businessmen. And it's really the huge fight right now between both sides. For sure, after the presence of Fattah al-Sisi, there is an important date that we should mention considering human rights. One of the worst incidents that I attended and that documented in my life was the massacre of Rabaa, when Muslim Brotherhood, known that it's an official military coup, they decide to protest in Rabaa Square in Cairo, like thousands of people. And in one day, the regime of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi decided that they will force them to go out of the square under any circumstances. And they use to reason this that they are a military protest, not a pacific protest. This is important thing to mention that, yeah, for sure, there were some weapons in this protest. That's what I see and what we document. But in comparison with the power of the police or the power of the army, it's nothing. Like it's like very, for me, like it's very depend on every person. It's not wasn't something systematic at this moment. Yeah, the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, during this the period after the uprisal of Fattah al-Sisi and the military coup, they use a lot of violence in the street, for example, against like anyone who's pro al-Sisi, or against the Christians, against a lot of church. That was really systematic. But in this, they killed like 1,200 in one day, in one night. In one night, they killed 1,200 Egyptian. I was in the hospitals after this massacre, and I documented a lot of humiliation of people who have been sniped directly in their heads. Even they targeted the daughters and sons of the heads of Muslim Brotherhood at this moment. But honestly, I'm really sure that if the Egyptian government wanted to make them out of the square without any violence, they are capable to do it, because they do it before a lot in Tahrir and they do it a lot in other cases. But they want it to be a historical thing, and they build on this moment how everyone will feel the fear or will rethink hundreds of times before protesting, before going to say something out loud, to demonstrate. Everyone, since this moment, really think more than one time to participate in any political activism, because it doesn't stop on that. They killed like 1,200. After that, they arrest all the leader of Muslim Brotherhood. They arrest everyone who interfere with Muslim Brotherhood in the last 30 years. Like, it was like dozens of people in the prison. There is no place for in the prison for the people. After this period, when the Egyptian government or the Egyptian like Fattah al-Sisi did that, he start not only to attack Muslim Brotherhood, but he start also to attack human rights organizations, journalists, advocates. He make a very important law that, if you want to check, two important laws that I will talk about. The first one is the laws of NGOs in Egypt. He was forcing the NGOs in Egypt to go through a specific manual that make them obligated to announce every program that they work on before receiving the fund. And for sure, that's not applicable in Egypt, because for sure, if I'm going to tell the Egyptian government I will document the humiliation inside the prison, for sure they will not accept the funding that I'm taking. If I'm talking to the Egyptian government, telling them that I will work over a project related to the LGBTQ plus community in Egypt, the humiliation that they are facing, for sure they will not accept the funding. So it was a legalizing way to look in front of the international opinion that we are trying only to legalize the presence of the human rights institution. But since announcing this law, tens of organizations of Egypt have been closed. That's plus that Egypt make a systematic censorship over any journal who's not working pro-government. And a very important case study is the Journal of MADA Masr, M-A-D-A. Masr is one of the most important and interesting examples about the censorship, because they work in Egypt, from Egypt, inside Egypt, and they have an office, but their website can't be open in Egypt in the last 8 years. So you can't have access to enter the website, but they start still trying to innovate some ways to publish their content and to ask people to use VPN, to use different links to overcome this kind of censorship. An important date is 2019, when the regime of Fattah al-Sisi humiliated human rights in all the ways, when he started to arrest all the people from the opposition. At this moment, they were forming a correlation called the hope of a change, and a lot of political figures participating in this group. He arrested everyone in this group in 2019, and in 2019 it was long time since the first time the people go back to the streets in Egypt and ask the Egyptian regime that they are really mad on their economical policies. And I think in 21 September 2029, the Egyptian regime arrested in one day more than 700 persons from all over Egypt, like in one day. After that, they arrested like a lot of people. I think in 2020, the number of the political prisons in Egypt was the maximum. It reached 65,000 political prisoners in prisons all over Egypt. And not only that, the important thing concerning human rights is the misusing of law. The Egyptian government misused the terrorism law to arrest all the opposition. Anyone who's part of a political party, anyone who's showing like any criticization for the Egyptian regime over social media, he go and he was imprisoned for 2 years in a pre-trial system. Like, they make a system of pre-trial detention that you stay for 2 years, and after the 2 years you can say, like, you can go out of the prison, but they misuse it. How? They make you stay for the 2 years, and after the end of the 2 years, in the first day, they take you again to the prosecution and put you on another case to stay another 2 years without trial. So at the end of the day, I worked over cases for people who stayed 9 years in the prison without one trial, only investigations, only hearing. So the misusing of law to humiliate human rights is something very embedded in the Egyptian judiciary system. And the problem that there is bias in Egypt, the transparency in the judiciary system is not founded. The judiciary system is only having this closeness to the Egyptian regime. So it's not transparent enough to have its own decision. And you have a very important example in front of you that right now I'm here today. I was released and I take a final sentence of 3 years for publishing one article about the Coptic minorities, 3 years in the prison for one article. But for sure, I wasn't in the prison for the article. That's like only what they are saying. I was in the prison because of my participation in the revolution, for documenting human rights violations, from documenting the oppression, for being and always working on a very sensitive stuff like the religious minorities and the LGBTQ plus community, because those are too sensitive files for them, because the propaganda of the Western countries always about the situation of minorities. So when they go to ask Egypt about human rights, the first thing that they expose are two files. What's the situation of the Christians in Egypt, and what's the situation of LGBTQ? So because I was working on both files exactly, they were really super always anxious about my activism. I know that I talk a little bit more, a lot, but okay, we can stop here. We can listen to other stuff.
Okay. As we are approaching the conclusion of this insightful discussion, we will now open the Q&A. But before that, I want to extend our deepest gratitude to our speakers, because their experience have given us a lot to reflect on. And yes, now we will proceed in this way. We collected some questions from the registration process, and so I will read them to two of them, and then people from the audience in presence can ask their question. You will have to come here, but it is like a safe place, so don't be anxious about it. And we will collect also some questions from the online chat. Okay, I will read the first two. They're very actual and they follow perfectly the line of our discussion. How is human rights activism in the MENA region currently being affected by Israel siege on Palestine? And the second one, how can resistance and revolution be carried out with the current political opposition and oppression by the police in non-violent protests? Thank you.
Can I start if you want to about the first question?
Sorry, I didn't get it. You want to start?
I don't mind as you.
Well, I mean, maybe I can say something about the first question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right? And yeah, leave the second one, which is definitely a tough point to take. How can resistance revolution be carried out? Well, so how the current situation in Palestine, I would say now in Lebanon, is impacting human rights activism in MENA. So it's very difficult to say, because it's all really something in the making. But what is happening in Palestine and Lebanon has really put some regime in the region on high alert, because think about the case of Saudi Arabia, or even of Egypt, which has normalized its relations with Israel a long time ago. Or Saudi Arabia, which wants to normalize, but this really let us understand how also the regime have limits, right? They could never really challenge a wildly popular position, which is one in solidarity with the Palestinian people in their own country, with carrying forward relations with Israel or normalizing ties with Israel in the case of countries such as Saudi Arabia. because this is something that is bearer of instability. This is the case also of countries such as Jordan, which has a large population of Palestinian origins, or any other countries in the region, even as far as Morocco, which has normalized ties with Israel. This regime always have to take into account that a situation like the one in Palestine is capable of mobilizing people, of bridging differences within the internal political situation, as it was the case in Egypt in the 2000s. Solidarity with Palestine allowed the development of political activism. This is true not only for the Middle East and North Africa, but even for Europe, right? And the issue of Palestine has brought together new realities throughout Europe, has started new waves of mobilization, even in a very demobilized country such as our own. Even in Italy, we've seen new mobilization. Not to say that this is something extraordinary or revolutionary, but this is to say that there are issues such as the Palestinian cause that are capable of mending division and mobilizing people. And this is something that regime in the region have to take into account. This is why countries such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or others have been very, very cautious in how they move forward. And they always also espoused a certain propaganda that seems to place them really at the forefront of the fight for Palestinian liberation, although this is not really the case. So this is the main idea that I think should be kept in mind at the moment.
Yeah, commenting over the first question considering Palestine, honestly, since the last year, I always thinking about what's human rights and was it the right choice for me to work in human rights after what's happening in the last year, because it always making me thinking, what's human rights? Is there human rights? Is there international law? Is there something that makes sense for me to stay working on making my PhD in human rights? Because no one is caring for human rights, and all the propaganda that have been done by Europe and USA is a fake propaganda when it comes to people of color. Human rights was only for the white people and not for everyone. When we are talking about the situation in Palestine and Lebanon, it's exclusive for the white people and not for everyone. It's important to make a comparison between how the institutions and how the governments lead in the two cases of Ukraine and of Palestine, how they deal with the Ukrainian people and how they welcome everyone, how they facilitate everything, how they change laws, how they make scholarships in universities, welcome them in the schools. Every day in the first page, you are talking about and reading about the massacres in Ukraine. I was with that, by the way. I was really totally agreeing with that. It's a very important thing. But when I saw what happened in Palestine of 1 year of systematic killing, and I prefer using genocide when I talk about this, but honestly, genocide, according to international law, it have a lot of ways to explain. So if we are talking in academic way, because now we are in the university, it's not the right thing or the best thing to say genocide, because still the International Criminal Court didn't announce it as a genocide. But for me, on a personal level, as a human rights defender, not academic, it's the full genocide. Yesterday, I didn't sleep because I was reporting on the massacre that take place of burning the tents of the Palestinians. I received 2 videos of kids melting of the fire. They are not fire, they are melting of the fire. Today, I opened the television, I didn't find the people are crying in the television. I didn't find the news talking about what's taking place in Palestine. No one really care. The propaganda of Israel have really succeeded to normalize the killing of Palestinians and Lebanese people. And that's a really challenging moment for us as a human rights defenders, as a human rights researchers. Did our work really valid? Is it important or not? For me, I always prefer to say that I want to work more in human rights because I want to be always the voice of the voiceless people, and the Palestinian and Lebanese people, if they didn't find us in the first rows defending their right for existing, because now we are not talking about their rights to eat or to drink or to like have a normal life. We are only talking about the right to exist. And that's not even valid right now. They are not existing for the Europeans, for the Western countries. They are not existing anymore. They don't even care about them. The first time that I see the president of the government here, the president of the current government talking, was only when they attacked the Italian bases in Lebanon. She never talked about the arming of Israel. She never talked about that the taxes, the money of the Italians are going in the weapons for the people in Israel to kill the Palestinians. Our money. Like, did you know about that your money is arming Israel to kill the civilians? We don't know. We didn't even choose that. So that's really an important barrier for us as a human rights defenders. We should think about our role and what's going on and how this will change a lot the upcoming years of the understanding of the international law and the importance of human rights, and how we want to work a lot to really change the ideas of all the third world countries or the people in the Middle East who are now really attacking me on a personal level because I was talking to them a lot about the importance of the European model of human rights and how it's really interesting and we should apply it in our countries. Now they are making fun of me. This is the model of the human rights of Europe and for USA, which is ignoring the situation in Palestine and Lebanon. So it's really challenging, and not only on international level, but also on local level, because for me, my case also is the prisoners of consciousness who are still there in Egypt. No one is talking about them. No one's talking about the women in Sudan who are raped on daily basis. No one talking about the kids who are killed in Sudan. No one talking about my colleagues who are still there in the prison, and there is no pressure to let them out of the prison. And we saw a lot of campaigns in the last 3 years when I was in the prison against Egypt to enhance the situation of human rights. Where are those people who were talking about now, about that in this time? Where is Biden who said that, oh, human rights is the priority? Where is all those? Where is Macron? Everyone who was criticizing Egypt for the human rights situation right now is supporting Israel normally and forget about the records of human rights in Egypt, because now their only key to be part of the equation in the region is Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So they should be close to Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So they should forget about all the humiliation and oppression of human rights that taking place till now in Egypt, because they need their benefit from the relation between Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Israel and Qatar. So now human rights is a mask that the European countries, USA, was using, and it was dropped after the first few days of the war. We should be aware when we are talking about this, and we should really learn from this experience of how we can deal with human rights in the upcoming years, because it's really a hard mission for us as people who are interested in human rights and working in this field. Going to the other question about how can resistance and revolution be carried out with the current political opposition, it's really
Just repeat the question for the public, if it's okay. How can resistance and revolution be carried out with the current political opposition and oppression by police in non-violent protests?
Yeah, it's really hard to talk about that. Yeah, something like, I don't know how, like, I find someone who's beating me and I will stay calm, like waiting for him. Like 1 week ago, I was in Rome on the 5th of October, participating in manifestation for the right to protest and Palestine and Lebanon, everything. I was there, honestly, when I heard about the calls of prohibiting the presence of people in the squares, because it's one of my rule is to support the people to have the right to protest. Like, I was there mainly, I attend a lot of manifestations for Palestine, so it wasn't urged for me to appear like in Rome or to present. But when I hear about the calls from the government that they are prohibiting people from using their right to protest, I was there and I saw how much there were violence there, and I saw how in one moment they make everyone run from the square. And it wasn't the first incident, because we have a very important incident when the students go out of the university participating in a protest for Palestine, and the police use violence toward them at the beginning of the war. Like, I think like in November, last November, they do that. So to say what is the tactics we can use to resist without violence, I'm a pacific person. I'm always supporting the peaceful protest and demonstration. But if someone is using violence, how I can tell the people tips to not respond for that? I will not like to respond for violence. But if someone coming attacking me, preventing me from protesting, how I can deal with that? I don't have a proper answer for this, because honestly, the history always talk about that our role as a human rights defender is to document, is to monitor, is to try to find ways to help the society not to have violence toward the protesters or who's trying to express himself. So my role is to monitor and to evaluate the situation and try to find policies that prevent the aggression toward the protesters. So that's my rule. But to find an answer how to do this, I think it's better to ask this question for politicians and for lawmakers who really don't work over this.
Okay, are there any questions from students here, first year students, for example? Please.
So actually the second, can you come here?
Because we have a lot of people online, so, and they, right there. I hope that's not a problem. Thank you very much, both of you, for your precious interventions, because right now, for me and many of my fellow colleagues, it's really important to address all these human rights violations and issues we see in the MENA region, but that are also starting we are also starting to experience in our countries. Like in Italy, we are having a lot of violations and violence directly from the police to nonviolent protesters and young people like me who believe in human rights. So it's a really hard topic, because it's hard to have hope every day and to not just feel so sad and seeing people burning alive in Palestine and only social media talking about it, because newspapers are not addressing these issues and human rights violations is devastating for me. But the second question was actually, how is it better, in your opinion, for us to organize ourselves as at the academic level, but also at personal and political level? Because I am one of those people that like to go and protest, but at the same time, it's really hard in a moment in which there's a lot of violence by the police and a lot of oppression of opinion, even in democratic countries such as Italy. So how is the best way? Because referring to the case of Egypt, you mentioned that the protest didn't go well after 2011, because all the protesters were divided. And I think this is a main topic also right now in Italy, for example. I take the example of my country because it's the country I experienced in the first place and I know well. And I see there's a lot from the opposition that I'm part of. There's a lot of dividends. We are really divided. So how is the best way to unite ourselves, to collectively organize ourselves in order to address all these violations? And thank you very much, both of you.
Well, I will play the role of the academic at this point, known that I was not a student and I did not ever participate in protest. I mean, I would say that a good starting point right now, I mean, it would be it might be contradictory, but you do study a lot. You do try to understand, and I will be even more, on the side of historiography. You do study history. You understand how things developed, which are the underlying dynamics of power in a given situation. This is very key, because there is a short historical memory in our own society for several reasons. I don't want to just spit out a few very evident talking points, but this is a fact. So, I mean, if you look at the life and the history of the most important revolutionary figures, you will find that they spent as much time in the library as in the street. So, you start with studying. It's going to be good for your future, any path you would choose to take, because understanding what happened in the past allows you to see the repetition of the same dynamics, allow you to understand even to understand what is going on in current affair. If you do not, possess a certain historical understanding of what's happening in Palestine, you fall very easily to propaganda talking points. And really, again, when it comes to Palestine, knowing history is the very best way to have it clearly, because it takes you to the very roots of the issue. And this can be applied to many other, virtually every aspect. So yeah, that is what my humble advice would be.
I think I can't add more about this topic, but for me, honestly, if I'm in your place, because I'm not Italian citizenship, so I don't have the right to tell you what you can do. But for sure, if I want to make a change, I would change the reason of what's happening right now. Who's the reason of what's happening right now is the policies of the current government. So if you want to change and you are not really accepting the current policies of the current government, you have the right to vote to change this, to organize and to build a very strong political body that can compete, that can be there, that can have the lead to change the current situation and unbearable democratic situation that I don't think in the last few years, Italy was in this critical moment considering democracy and human rights. So that's the way by book. I'm not asking anyone to do anything. I don't have bias. I'm independent. I'm not belonging to any party. I'm a human rights defender only. So that's the way. If you are asking me, that's the answer. If you want to change, you go to change the reason behind the situation and who's the reason. You have all the answers. You are a brilliant student and you know what you can do considering this.
Thank you so much. I will read a question from the online chat. Last week in Tunisia have been held election and the former president Kais Saied won for nearly 90% of the votes. Despite the lack of protest, voter turnout was under 30%. Historically, is low voter turnout an effective form of protest? And what alternative strategies might be considering, especially when people fear for their safety? And additionally, are there common patterns in how population in North African Arab countries resist oppressive regimes? And it's a question for Professor Leopardi.
Thank you very much. This is where I regret joining events like this, right? Well, what can I say? The problem of low turnout is something that we actually can observe throughout the region. The last example was Tunisia. Over the last years, Algeria, which had its own season of protests, also open a transition period where the current president was elected by really a very, very low turnout that in some region reached really 0%, for instance. So is this an effective way to oppose a regime? I mean, not sure, but sometimes it's one of the few available for the larger population, because it delegitimizes, of course, the regime that cannot claim popular support. Many of these regimes have built their image as being in a father-child relation with their own population. This was really the case. The most impressive and historical first example was that of Atatürk in Turkey. Atatürk means the father of the Turks, right? And this has been replicated. So the moment your children are not turning out to your party, this is something which are the elections, right? This is something that really starts to question this kind of relations and this kind of image. And so you also are delegitimized to a certain extent. But this also highlights another issue. Election voting does not equal democratization, right? Sometimes voting and an election actually are something counterproductive in terms of democratization. If there is no meaningful practices, democratic practices in society, elections are meaningless. And this is unfortunately a dynamic that we are also observing in Europe, where, by the way, turnout is dwindling at each new round of elections. I'm not sure that I covered all of the question, not sure about it, but I think that I can stop here. Yeah.
About Tunisia, exactly, because I wrote 2 articles about Tunisia, you can find them. That's we also really important to think about who was the main supporter of Kais Saied from Europe, who was the main funder for Kais Saied from Europe to try to overcome the migrants issues, which is very important. Who was the main one? It was EU and Meloni. So it was very important to highlight this, and that we reached the point that Kais Saied won with 90%, and he arrested all the opposition, all the people who tried to be in the presidential race with him. He arrested all the opposition journalists. He even closed numerous number of human rights institutions. So that should also lead us to think how it works and how it's not always the reference for the institutions, human rights, but their benefits and how they are thinking that they could overcome a problem like the migrants problem with supporting even regimes like Kais Saied regimes.
Okay, so are there any other questions on site or online? Okay, if there aren't any, I will just thank everybody in this room, starting with our guest speakers who made a very, very big effort to be here today. And thank you because you gave us so many points of departure for so much studying, research, and doing information. And I'm very, very grateful how this event turned out to be, because it is very, very rich. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you to the staff of the Human Rights Center, who also made a huge effort to make everything possible today, and to Professor De Perini, director, and Professor Masha, director of the center. And if you have any other questions, and also, especially, I will focus this, we are recruiting, even if this is a bad word, because we are just like a group of students. We just met last year, and we decided to create a safe space and a space where we can actually go deeper in topics that maybe we tackle at lecture. It all started like that last year with the human rights defenders and shelter cities with Professor De Perini. And then we did some other events just to go deeper and have a place to discuss and to get in touch with the Human Rights Center, to get also in contact with the experts from the topics we want to focus on. So please contact us. Also, you can meet us here and ask us about our contact. Like we are on Instagram, Advocacy Hub, and we have also an email account that you will find in the link tree on our Instagram profile. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening.
I was really happy, and thanks for the great chance to be with all of you. I was really pleased. Thanks for the professor. Thanks also for the prof for having like both of you is an ad for me, and to be with the panel with my colleagues, because now I'm PhD student, so they are my colleagues. I was really pleased. One last thing that we should think about, that yesterday, 5 Palestinians have been killed. Kids have been killed while playing football. They were playing football over the rubble of their houses, and today Israel is playing a match in Italy against the Italian national team in Udinese, and there weren't any position toward what's happening, and nothing will happen toward this. So that also make us think about what we are right now and what's the level that we reach right now from human rights and the humanization of human rights. That's a final thing that I really interested to mention about the current situation.